When creating images for the web, it is important to understand which types of images you can use online and when it's appropriate to use one over the other. Determining which file type to use is usually a decision made after considering file size and functionality. For online graphics, your goal is always going to be obtaining the best image quality in the smallest file size possible. Understanding how file types are compressed and best practices for creating them will help you keep your image quality high while keeping file size down. Before we discuss how Dreamweaver manages images, let's first examine the three file types you'll be using when creating your web graphics: JPEGs, GIFs, and PNGs. JPEG is short for Joint Photographic Experts Group and is a standard that has been around in one form or another since about 1992. The JPEG file format allows you to create images with millions of colors, which makes it an ideal choice for photographs or images with subtle color differences. The downside to using JPEGs is that when saved, a lossy compression is used to save file size, resulting in image data being thrown away. Although you can choose the amount of compression when saving a JPEG, data is discarded each and every time it is saved. For that reason, it's a good idea to save your original image in a file format other than JPEG and simply overwrite the original JPEG when a change is made to the source graphic. Also, JPEGs do not support transparency or animation, which may make them unsuitable for certain uses. The GIF, short for Graphics Interchange Format, file format was first introduced by CompuServe in 1987 and quickly became a staple for online graphics. Unlike the 24-bit JPEG format, GIFs are 8 bits, which limits the color palette of GIF files to a maximum of 256 colors. Now, GIFs do have the advantage of using a lossless compression format, which reduces file size without damaging image quality. GIFs also support animation and transparency, making them the favorite file format of icons and dancing babies worldwide. Due to their limited palette, GIFs are not well suited for images that have subtle tonal shifts or a wide range of color. They are, however, ideal for smaller thumbnails or images that have large areas of solid colors. PNG stands for Portable Network Graphics and owes its existence to the very curious case of Unisys holding the patent for the compression algorithm used in GIFs in 1995. PNGs were designed to replace GIFs and share many of the GIF file format strengths, but they have added functionality. PNGs, like GIFs, support transparency and use lossless compression to achieve smaller file sizes. Unlike GIFs, however, PNG files are 24-bit graphics, which allow them to display millions of colors and subtle tonal shifts without using dithering or banding. So, which file format should you use? Well, honestly, it depends on each individual image and how that image is going to be used within your files. As a general rule, JPEGs are best for large images and photographs, specifically images that have lots of color and detail. High compression settings can cause serious image degradation, so it's best to compare image quality and compression for each image before deciding on an export setting for your JPEG. As a best practice, remember to keep a source image for your JPEG so that you're not editing and overwriting the JPEG itself. JPEG image quality degrades each time it's saved, and this can result in an unusable image over time if saved over and over itself. GIFs are great for thumbnails, small icons, or images that contain large areas of solid colors. They're also a standard image type for any image needing transparency or limited animation. Now, keep in mind that GIFs do have a limited palette, so complex images with lots of color or tonal shifts like gradients can suffer when saved as GIFs. PNGs also have all the advantages of GIFs without the liabilities. PNGs feature full 24-bit support, so millions of colors can be saved along with transparency. The downside to using PNGs is that they tend on average to be a little bit bigger than GIFs and JPEGs, so heavy use of them throughout your site tends to add to the site's overall weight. Older browser support was spotty at best, so for legacy sites or sites that target older browsers, PNG files are not a good choice. Also, Internet Explorer 6 did not support transparency for PNGs, resulting in having to write some pretty fancy CSS to force PNG transparency support. As a whole, PNG usage is rapidly increasing on the web, but if used, the file format is usually used to supplement graphics on sites or to do things that JPEGs and GIFs just can't. In the end, the file format you use for web graphics is totally up to you. Knowing more about the file types and their capabilities will help you make an informed choice. Before we discuss placing and modifying images, I want to take a moment to talk about managing your images in Dreamweaver using the Assets panel. The Assets panel provides you with a nice central location to manage and control a number of assets, including images. It allows you to organize your images, place images directly on the page by dragging and dropping them, gives you a thumbnail preview of your images, and displays additional image information. So I have the gallery.htm open from the 0802 Explorers folder, and I'm just going to take a moment to rearrange my workspace a little bit so that we can focus on the Assets panel a little bit more clearly. The first thing I'm going to do is close my CSS Styles panel, or at least collapse it by double-clicking on the tab there. And you're going to find the Assets panel just next to the Files panel. So you can just click on that tab, and the Assets panel will become the active panel. Now, I want to take you on a brief tour before we focus on the image capabilities of the panel itself and kind of where everything is located. Now, on the left-hand side, you're going to see a series of categories. These little icons represent different things like templates, library items, movies, like QuickTime movies, Flash files, links, images. And if any of those are highlighted, you're going to see that content, if you have it within the site, rather than your images. So the images are the very top category. You want to go ahead and select that. Now, as soon as you do that, you're going to see a list of all of the images in your site. Clicking on one of those images, and trust me, you only want to click on it once. I'll show you why that is in just a little bit. But if you click on one of the images, you'll see a little thumbnail of it right above the Assets panel. And that's probably my favorite part of this panel. You know, a lot of times you can forget exactly what you've named an image, especially if a lot of your image names are similar. So being able to click on the image and literally see a thumbnail of it is very, very handy. Now, this is going to show you a listing of every single image in your site. So it's not just the images directory that this is scanning. It's scanning every folder and subdirectory within your entire site. And any image, any JPEG, PNG file, GIF file that it finds, it's going to list here and display. Now, you can see in my Assets panel, I have 2 of each of these guys. What's going on there? Well, remember, we have our exercise files folder, and we also have a finished files folder that's an exact duplicate of this, just with finished files. And that's why we're seeing 2 of these. So I would like to organize these a little better. And that's an important task with the Assets panel, because based on the size of your site, as the larger it gets, the more images you get. And obviously, scrolling through all these images and trying to find exactly the one that you're looking for can be a little daunting. So let's talk about how we can use the Assets panel to organize your information a little bit more clearly. Well, one of the things I'm going to do here is expand the Assets panel out. I'm just going to sort of drag that divider out so that I can see more content. And wow, you can see that there's actually a lot more to the Assets panel than we could see in that narrow view we were looking at before. So we have columns for the name of the image, the dimensions, the size of the image, the file type, the path, and you can actually sort by all of those. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go over to full path and I'm going to click. And what that's going to allow me to do is it's going to put all of my main images in one place and the finished files images in another list. So I'm essentially looking at 2 lists here now, one of the images in the exercise files and the other one, the images in the finished files. So that's going to help me sort through just a single version of these and not have to deal with the multiple versions that I was seeing just a minute ago. That's nice, but even then, there's still a ton of images here. And if I'm looking for just the images that are going to be in my gallery, that's going to make it a little bit harder on me. So one of the things that we can do to add a little bit more organization to our assets is to take advantage of favorites. You can see at the very top of the Assets panel, there are 2 radio buttons, one for Site and one for Favorites. Now, Site is just indicating, hey, these are all of the images in your site. Favorites is your way of sort of making sure that you're only looking at the ones you want to look at. It's a way of sort of filtering the results of this site. And I'm going to show you a couple of different ways to add images to your favorites, and then we'll do a few things over in our favorites to organize those images as well. Well, I'm really interested in the images that are going to be going into my gallery, because that is the page that we are currently working on. So I'm very curious as to where these images are and what they are. So I happen to know by just scrolling through here that this bird image is part of my gallery. So I really would like to add that over to my favorites. Well, there's a couple of different ways for me to do that. First, I can right-click or control-click that object and choose Add to Favorites. We'll go ahead and do that. Now, as soon as you do that, Dreamweaver is going to give you this nice little message that says, hey, I've added that to the favorites. You want to take a look at it, choose Favorites at the top of the Assets panel. This can get kind of annoying because every single time you add something to the favorite, this message is going to come up. So it does have this, don't show me this message again, and you could go ahead and check that, and you wouldn't have to worry about that sort of confirmation message every single time you add something to that. Now, I also notice I've got this Golden Gate image, and I know that's part of my favorites as well, so I can select that. And in the lower right-hand corner of my Assets panel, there's that little ribbon with a plus symbol beside it, and that says Add to Favorites as well, and I can go ahead and click on that. So that's yet another way to add those images to the favorites as well. And the thing that confirmation message does for you is it makes sure that you don't click that ribbon like 2 or 3 times, because you can keep adding this to the favorites if you'd like. All right, so I'm going to switch over to my favorites now, and now I can see just the bird and just the Golden Gate. Now, you'll notice that it didn't remove them from the overall view. What you're really looking at here is just a filtered results view. You're just saying, hey, I just want to display these types of images. Now, the more you do that, obviously, the more crowded this area can get as well. So I'm going to talk about a way in just a moment to organize your favorites a little bit better than we're doing currently. Now, you are free over in the favorites to actually change the name of the image, and it won't physically change the name of the image. This is what's known as a nickname. So you could say for one of these, bird large if it's not the thumbnail, and Golden Gate large if it's not the thumbnail. So just by clicking the name one time, you can go ahead and give that whatever nickname you want. Now, that does not change the name of the image. You're not physically renaming the image. You can see in the full path, it's still bird.jpg. It's still goldengate.jpg. You're just giving it what's known as a nickname over here in the favorites. And that's really helpful if you have several different versions of an image or images that are located in different folders that are doing similar things for you. You can go ahead and name those something that makes a little bit more sense to you, but doesn't actually change the name of the image itself. Okay, I'm going to show you maybe a faster way to organize images within your favorites. So what I'm going to do here is select both of these guys, and I'm going to remove them from my favorites. That way we won't have duplicates, and I can do that very quickly by selecting both of them, going down to the Assets panel, and in the favorites you now have that ribbon with a minus symbol on it, and that will remove them from the favorites. So I can add things to the favorites from several different locations. For example, I'm going to switch over to the Files panel again. And in the Files panel, I'm going to open up my Images directory, and I can see that I have a folder here solely for my gallery images. So they're located in their own subdirectory. I'm going to go ahead and open up that subdirectory, and I'm going to start with the first graphic in the gallery directory, hold my Shift key down, and click on the last one. So I just want to select all of those images that are currently part of my gallery. I'm going to go ahead and right-click those. And when I right-click them, one of the things that I can do down here towards the bottom of this contextually sensitive menu, and of course that's Control-click on the Mac, I can say Add to Image Favorites. So as soon as I do that, switch back to my Assets panel. Now when I look at my favorites, I have all of those images already there. So you can do it in the Files panel. You can do it from the Site view of the Assets panel. It's really up to you in terms of how you want to do that. Now, you can see at this point, we have a lot of images here in our favorites. Well, what if we had multiple galleries, or maybe we wanted to start putting banner ads in here, or larger photographs in here, all sharing similar themes? Well, all of a sudden, you would end up with exactly the problem that you have here in the Site view. You've got to scroll through all these guys and try to figure out who's who. So you do have some organizational tools available to you here in the favorites. If you look in the lower right-hand corner of the Assets panel, you're going to see this little orange icon that looks like a folder. It is indeed a favorites folder. And if I click on that, it's going to create a brand new untitled folder. I'm just going to title this Gallery because these are all of our gallery images. And now I am free to select all of these images and place them in the Gallery folder. That folder can then be opened and closed whenever I need to view those particular assets. Now, let me be very clear about this. This does not create a folder within your site directory. We did not move these images anywhere. This is merely a tool for organizing these images here within the favorites view. So that's the only place you'll ever see those particular folders. So I could add logos over here, banner ads, larger images, create folders for them, and then that allows me to very quickly and easily access those images, which is really, really cool. Okay, now, so other than organizing our images and being able to click on one and see a little thumbnail of it, what does the Assets panel really do for us? Well, in addition to organizing your assets, it allows you to place them on the page very quickly and very easily. Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to switch back over here to my gallery page, and I'm just going to scroll down, and I can see that within the gallery, there are all these photographs beside the descriptive text, but our last one is lacking the photograph, so it doesn't have its image. And the image that we're looking for is this oranges image. So the oranges.jpg, I can select that once right here in the Assets panel, and I can see the image. Now, there are a few ways to insert this image on the page. The first one would be just go ahead and place your cursor wherever you would want your image, maybe right in front of the M there. Highlight the oranges in the Assets panel, and then click the Insert button. So if you highlight an image and you click Insert, wherever your cursor is within your page, it's going to place it in that exact location. That's really handy if you've got a very precise layout or if you have a really tight area and you want to make sure that you're placing it exactly where you need it. You can just place your cursor in there, click insert, the image is going to show up. There's another way to do it, and this way might be, well, maybe a little bit more fun, and that's dragging and dropping. So I can go right over here to the Assets panel, find this oranges image. I'm going to click once on its icon, hold the mouse down, and I'm just going to drag. And I'm going to drag that right in front of the M where it says Max, let go. And I'm just going to give it some alt text. I'm just going to type in Orange Groves because we have our accessibility attributes turned on. And then I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And in comes my image, shows up exactly where I want it. And although we're going to cover this a little bit later on, just to make sure that it looks the same, I'm going to select the image, go down to the Properties Inspector, and I'm going to grab the Class pull-down menu and choose Gallery Image. There we go. Now it looks like the other two. And we're going to learn how to do that in just a little bit. But now our image is inserted on the page very quickly, very easily. We do that in a visual way. And in that way, the Assets panel is a really efficient way of sorting through your images, organizing those images, and then getting those images on the page. So it's a really nice tool for doing that. Now, the Assets panel does allow us to do one more thing, and let me show you what that is. Now, if you notice in the lower right-hand corner of the Assets panel, we have another little icon down here. It looks like a page with a pencil on top of it. If you hover over that, it says Edit. Now, what that's going to do for you, if you select an image and you click that icon, it's going to open up that image in whatever program you've specified to be the image editor for that file type. So you can set Fireworks, Photoshop, GIMP, whatever program you like. And we're going to do that in a little bit in one of our movies. But what I'm going to do right now is show you another way of doing that. If you go to your image, let's say this oranges image, for example, and you just highlight it and double-click it. And trust me, you will probably find this by mistake. It's really easy to double-click an image without meaning to. But when you do that, you're going to be taking on a little trip out to Fireworks to Photoshop and then have to come back into Dreamweaver. So you want to be careful about that. But sometimes you mean to do it. So if I double-click the oranges here, it's going to launch Photoshop. There we go. And it's going to open that image up directly in Photoshop. So that's really nice. I don't have to go hunting through any directories. I don't have to open up Photoshop first and then do a file open and search for that image. I can just double-click right in the Assets panel, open that up. So that's pretty cool. Now, the Assets panel isn't for everyone. I know several designers that don't use it at all in their workflow. However, for a site that is very image-heavy, using the Assets panel to organize and manage your image assets can really speed up your image-related tasks. Searching through hundreds of images is a lot easier if you've taken advantage of categorizing them using the Favorites feature. However, for a site that is very image-heavy, using the Assets panel to organize and manage your image assets can really speed up your image-related tasks. Searching through hundreds of images is a lot easier if you've taken advantage of categorizing them using the Favorites feature. What's more, the Assets panel makes placing those images on the page once you've found them as simple as dragging and dropping. I personally love the ability to see a thumbnail of the image in the Assets panel. That allows me to confirm that I've got the right image before I place it on the page. Whether you use it a little bit or a lot, you owe it to yourself to try out the Assets panel and see how it can assist you when working with images in Dreamweaver. By now, you're probably itching to get started and actually working with some images on your pages. However, before we do that, there's one more little detail we need to take care of. Dreamweaver allows us to set accessibility preferences for several types of objects, images among them. By setting those preferences before we begin working, we can control how Dreamweaver responds when we place an image on our page. Although just how strict you are with accessibility standards is a personal decision and often driven by the type of site you're working on, there are certain baseline standards that need to be met when designing websites. At a minimum, each of your images should have alternative text. Alternative text, often referred to as alt tagging your images, allows screen readers and other devices to offer brief descriptions or comments regarding the images on the page. This text can be short as one word or longer if required, although it's not recommended that you go past a single sentence. The basic idea behind alt text is that it should offer a brief description of the image or pass along some meaning, especially if the image is a link or represents data of some type. After placing an image on the page in Dreamweaver, you can select the image and enter the alt text using the Properties Inspector. However, in a busy environment and often pressed for time, it's not uncommon for designers and developers to forget to alt tag their images when they are placed. This error is often compounded by the amount of images on the page and sometimes goes unfixed. I'd venture to say that missing alt text is probably the most common accessibility error. Fortunately, Dreamweaver's accessibility preferences allows us to have Dreamweaver prompt us for alt text each and every time an image is placed on the page. This gentle reminder helps make sure each time an image is inserted that we type in some alt text. So let's set our accessibility preferences and see them in action. So to set your preferences, you're just going to go to Edit and choose Preferences. And if you're on the Mac, you're going to go to Dreamweaver and choose Preferences. And you want to go to your accessibility category. Now, I am betting that you already have a check mark right here where it says Images. And the reason that I say that is because that is the default setting in Dreamweaver. So unless you went in and turned that off, I'm betting that's turned on. You just want to verify that indeed Images does have that check mark beside it. Now go ahead and click OK. Now I'm just going to switch over to my Assets panel because I'm looking for a specific asset. I'm looking for the flagphoto.jpg. So the flagphoto.jpg is going to go right here, right before this sentence, are you looking for an exciting adventure? So I'm just going to drag and drop that right there to are you looking for an exciting adventure? And as soon as I let go of my mouse, up comes our image tag accessibility attributes. I'm going to go ahead and alt text this. I'm just going to type in the alternate text area right here, the great state of California. And I'm going to put an exclamation point in there because I'm pretty excited about that. Now, there is a long description field here. And if you have an image that is a pie chart or a graph or something that contains more information to that, then you can enter into your alt text. You can point that to another file that has descriptive information about that image. All right, I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And sure enough, there's my image. We need to make sure that the text is going to flow around it. So let's apply a class style to that. Select the image, and the class pull-down menu in the Properties Inspector is right here on the right-hand side. Grab that, and we want to use one of the classes that's up top, Article Image, and that is going to format that so that the text wraps around it. Perfect. More importantly, take a look in the Properties Inspector right here. This is our alt text, the great state of California. So if you, for some reason, forgot, or if you just change your mind and you want to change what's typed in there, at any point in the cycle, you can select an image and go ahead and enter in that alt text for it. Okay, so, I mean, that was pretty easy, but you know what? Even with the accessibility preferences turned on, you could ignore them, and you could just continue to place your images right on the page without entering any alt text. But with this dialog prompt that the preference is giving us, you're less likely to forget or ignore this extremely important property. Now, it may seem annoying at first, and hey, I'll even grant that it might seem annoying from then on, but the truth is, if it's going to help me create more accessible websites, it is definitely worth the brief intrusion into my creative process. One of the nice things about working with Dreamweaver is how seamlessly it integrates with other Creative Suite applications such as Photoshop and Fireworks. When working with the images for your site, it's inevitable that you're going to occasionally need to tweak or edit those images. Dreamweaver makes editing your images remarkably easy. Often all that is required is a single click, which will then open your image in your favorite image editing software. So how does Dreamweaver know which program to use when editing your images? In this movie, we're going to take a look at how you can set exactly which programs Dreamweaver uses for image editing purposes. So I have the tours.htm open here, and the first thing we need to go take a look at are our preferences. So I'm going to go up to Edit, Preferences. Of course, if you're on the Mac, you're going to go to Dreamweaver and choose Preferences. And the category that we're looking for is File Types/Editors. Now, what you're going to see down here in the lower left-hand corner of this pane is a list of extensions. This obviously relates to more than just images, but for this chapter, that is exactly what we're interested in. Notice for pings, for example, that Fireworks and Photoshop are listed, but Photoshop is listed as being the primary editing software. Well, if you're working with a lot of mock-ups in your site and you have a lot of Fireworks files, it would be very easy to select Fireworks and say Make Primary, and you can just toggle those back and forth between whichever one you wanted to be the primary image. Same thing for GIFs. We're going to make sure that Photoshop is primary. Same thing for JPEGs. We're going to make sure Photoshop is primary. Now, what happens if you need to add a program? Maybe you've got an open source program like GIMP or something like that, and you want to add that to the mix as well. Well, you can hit this plus symbol right here and browse to find any program installed on your hard drive. So if you have another editing software you like or a different version of Photoshop that you want to use, you're free to go ahead, browse out, find those programs, and add them right here to this list. So pretty easy to do, actually. And you can do that for any file type you want. You can just go through those extensions and tell Dreamweaver exactly which program you want to use to edit that. All right, everything looks fine. Photoshop is listed as my primary for all the image types I'm going to be using. So I'm just going to go ahead and click OK. Now, what does that actually do for us? Well, I'm going to scroll down and find this image of the flag that we were talking about in our previous movie, and I'm going to go ahead and select that. Now, when I select that, the Properties Inspector is going to change. It's going to reflect my image properties. Now, one of the things that it does for me is it gives me this really nice little set of icons here for editing my image. And you can see right there is the Photoshop icon. Now, the reason we're seeing a Photoshop icon instead of a fireworks icon is because we set that in our image editing preferences as being the file type editor for JPEGs. And if I click on that, it's going to switch over to Photoshop and open that image directly in Photoshop. I can make any changes I want to this, increase contrast, maybe make it a little bit more vibrant, whatever I'd like to do there. Save it out, and if I came back into Dreamweaver, Dreamweaver would automatically update the image on the page. Now, there are other ways to trigger image editing in Dreamweaver as well. So I'm going to close this image and switch back to Dreamweaver. If I select my graphic and right-click it, notice that I do have Edit With and Edit Original With. Interesting. We're going to talk about that Edit Original With a little bit later on when we talk about integration with other products. But Edit With allows me to choose anything in my preferences. And if I have a program that I want to work on this image with that's not part of that list, I can browse out and find that as well. So if you just want to do a single edit and you don't feel like going through your preferences, you can right-click it and choose Edit With. Single-click editing of images is a fantastic feature, and being able to choose which program to use for your edits makes it even more powerful. Regardless of whether you're using Photoshop, Fireworks, or even open-source solutions like GIMP or Acorn, take a second before starting your next Dreamweaver project and set your image editing preferences. It's going to make your workflow more efficient and save you a considerable amount of time. Regardless of what you are doing, having multiple options for completing the task at hand is a good thing. When it comes to placing images on the page, you have plenty of options to choose from in Dreamweaver. In this movie, we'll explore different methods for getting images onto your web pages and discuss the pros and cons of each technique. So I have the gallery.html file open from the 0805 Explorers folder. And if we scroll down the page a little bit here, we can see that we have a region down here where we need to place our images on the page right beside the descriptive text. So no images on the page there yet. And as we place each of the images on the page, we're going to explore a different technique for getting those images into your web pages. Well, the first technique we're going to use is the menu. So if you place your cursor right in front of this first sentence right here, this shot is sent in by Samara IODC. So just go ahead and place your cursor right there. And we want to go up to the menu, and we have a menu option called Insert. So go to Insert, and you want to insert image. You'll notice there that we also have a hotkey for those, and that is Control-Alt-I or Command-Option-I. And when we use the menu to insert an image on the page, we get a dialog box that's a little different from some of the other methods. And the nice thing about using the insert menu is that we get a few more choices and options than some of the other methods. As we browse into our 0805 folder, I'm going to go into the images directory, and here I can see a listing of all my images. Of course, you can choose how you want to display these. I'm just going to display them as details so that I get a nice listing of this. And of course, you can increase the size of the dialog box if you need to. And there is a folder in the images directory called Gallery. So I'm going to browse into that. And I want to find this goldengate.jpg. Now, there's a thumbnail version of it and the larger version. We want to insert the larger version on the page. Now, before you double-click this, just go ahead and click it once to highlight it, because I want to take a look at some of these options that we get in this dialog box that we don't get through some of the other techniques of placing images on the page. The first thing we notice is at the very top, select file name from file system or data sources. If you were working on a dynamic website, say something that was PHP-based, and you were pulling images from a database, this would be a very nice way to do that, because you click on data sources, browse through all of your databases, and choose where from the database that image needed to come from. So that's one way to do that. The other thing that this gives us is it gives us a nice ability to browse through our images. We can filter certain file types, which is very nice. And it also shows us how it's going to resolve the URL or the path to this image. So it's going to show you where from this page your browser is going to need to go to find this image. So if there's something a little bit wrong, maybe you browsed into the wrong folder that's in a different directory, it'll show up here that maybe it's not exactly what you want, which is really nice. All right, so everything looks the way I want it to look, so I'm going to go ahead and click OK. We're prompted for alternative text, so I'm just going to type in Golden Gate Bridge and click OK, and our image is on the page. So that is the first method that I want to show you guys. The second method is a very similar method, but it involves not having to go all the way through the menu structure of Dreamweaver. So I'm going to scroll down and place my cursor right beside these olives were taken by Andy Ta. So place your cursor right at the beginning of that sentence. And instead of going up to the menu, we're going to go to our Insert panel. Now, I have my Insert panel docked horizontally. Some of you guys might see it over here in the panel dock, but you want to be looking at the common objects. So we're going to look at the common objects. Now, the common objects has a group of objects that deal with inserting images on the page. If I grab the pull-down menu here, I can see that I can insert images, image placeholders, which allow you to place a placeholder image on the page if you don't have an image picked out for that spot yet, but you would want to show an object taking up that amount of space within the layout. Placeholder images do that for you. And we have all sorts of different things like rollovers and firework HTML that we can place on the page. Here we're just going to do insert image, so you can just click that icon directly, or you can grab it through the pull-down menu. Now notice that that gives us the exact same dialog box. So using the menu or using the insert panel, we get this sort of more detailed dialog box that we can use. Now I'm going to browse through here, and I'm going to find the olives.jpg. Now it should take you into the exact same directory, but if it doesn't, remember that we are in the gallery directory located in the images subdirectory. So I'm going to choose the olives.jpg, click OK, and I'm just going to type in olives for the alternative text, and there's my olives picture. Fantastic. Now obviously there are certainly more ways of placing images on the page, so we're going to go down. And the next line where it says Megan Anderson sent us this picture of a nervous shorebird, I'm going to place my cursor just in front of the M for Megan. Now I'm going to go over to my Files panel. And in my Files panel, I can browse my directory structure, including my images. So if I open my Images directory, and then I open up the Gallery directory, it should allow me to locate pretty easily this bird.jpg. Now notice here, we're not getting any type of thumbnail preview. We're not getting any information about resolving that path. But it does give us quick and easy access to these images. Okay, so how do we use the Files panel to place images on the page? You simply grab the image, drag it to where you want it on the page, and you let go. So you can literally drag and drop images from the Files panel. That might not be that intuitive, but it's a very quick and easy way to do this. I'm just going to give it some alternative text of shorebird, and there's our image on the page. Cool. Now, how else can we place images on the page? Well, once again, I'm going to go down to the last section here. Max Smith sends us a picture from an orange grove on his Taste of California tour, and I'll place my cursor right in front of the M. Now, if you watched one of the earlier movies on the Asset panel, you've already seen this next technique. I'm going to switch over to my Assets panel, and I'm going to make sure I'm looking at my Favorites section of my image assets. Now, again, I would encourage you, if you haven't watched that movie yet, to go ahead and review what you can do with the Assets panel, because here I already have a folder called Gallery that I've created in my favorite section and placed all of those images into it. So I've already sort of filtered that view out. Okay, I'm looking for this oranges image, and I have two options here. I can drag and drop it on the page, or since I've already placed my cursor in front of the M for Max, I can simply select the oranges image and then click the Insert button in the lower left-hand corner. That's going to place the image on the page exactly where my cursor was located. So I'm just going to type in Orange Grove for the alternative text, and now the image shows up on the page. Perfect. So we've covered 4 techniques. We've used the Insert menu, we've used the Insert panel, we've used the Files panel, and the Assets panel. You may have noticed that the first 2 techniques give us a dialog box that allows us to browse out to a specific directory, find the images, filter which ones we're looking at, and it shows us how a path is being resolved. It also allows us to choose images from a dynamic data structure, which the other 2 techniques, dragging from the Files panel or dragging from the Assets panel, does not give us. So you might not be utilizing each of these techniques that we've talked about here, but it's worth noting the strengths of each one of them so that you can use the technique that best fits your current situation. Having choices is a good thing, and thankfully Dreamweaver provides plenty of those when placing images on a page. One of the benefits of working within a suite of software, such as Adobe's Creative Suite, is the powerful integration between programs within the suite itself. Dreamweaver features a number of integrated workflows with Photoshop, which can make working with images in your site much easier. The most powerful integration between the 2 programs is Dreamweaver's support of Photoshop Smart Objects. Smart Objects allow you to insert a Photoshop file directly onto your page in Dreamweaver, and then makes editing and updating the image between the programs a snap. In exploring the integration between Dreamweaver and Photoshop, we'll first look at working with Photoshop Smart Objects, explore editing and updating our Photoshop images, and then look at alternative workflows between Dreamweaver and Photoshop. So here we have our gallery.html file open, and this is from the 0806 Explorers folder, and I've got a banner graphic that I want to place on the page just below all of my photos. Now, currently, the banner graphic is simply a Photoshop file, and it's a layered Photoshop file because occasionally we're going to need to have different seasonal banner graphics, maybe a spring, a summer, a winter, that sort of thing. So in a non-integrated workflow, I would be forced to go into Photoshop, export this out as a JPEG, come back into Dreamweaver, import the JPEG in. And then if I ever needed to change the banner graphic, I would have to go back out into Photoshop, open the Photoshop file up again, overwrite my other JPEG, come into Dreamweaver and verify that the proper JPEG was on my page. So obviously Smart Objects is going to make that workflow considerably more efficient. So let's take a look at how this works. What I'd like you to do is go ahead and scroll down at the very bottom of the page, find the last sentence, yes we did, and hit return. That's going to give you an empty paragraph just below all of that. Now if your cursor jumps up to the top of the page, don't worry, we're doing some floating here with some of these objects. When we place the layered Photoshop file on the page, we'll be okay. All right, what I'd like you to do is go up to Insert and choose Image. So we're going to use the menu to do this, although really any of the techniques that we covered earlier about placing images on the page would work just fine. Now, when your Select Image Source dialog box comes up, you need to browse to the 0806 directory. And instead of going into the Images directory, this time I'm going to go into the Assets directory. And inside there, I should find that banner.psd file that we're looking for. So banner.psd, this is a fully layered Photoshop file. It's not been flattened at all. And we're going to insert that directly on the page. Go ahead and click OK. And now what Dreamweaver is going to do is it's going to say, okay, you need to take this Photoshop file and export that out as a web graphic. So it's going to be doing this step for us. We get the optimization window from Photoshop that opens up. We get to choose our file type, any optimization settings that we want, and we could modify this file even further by changing the size of the file, really anything that we wanted to do to it. Well, the JPEG format is probably going to work the best for this, so I'm going to leave the format as JPEG, and the 80 quality is going to work just fine. Notice that it's giving me a preview of what size this file is going to be. 36K for this graphic will be fine. You're free to change those if you'd like. You can change the format. If you look over in the File tab, you could change the size of this graphic if it wasn't the size you needed it, that sort of thing. All right, so since it's the way we want it to be, I'm just going to go ahead and click OK. Now, this is going to prompt me to save the graphic. So I want to go into the Images directory of the 0806 directory, and I'm just going to call this banner.jpg. Now, when I save this, I might be prompted to overwrite one that already exists, and that's okay because the old banner that we had in there, we want to get rid of that and replace it with this brand new one that we've got. So I'm going to click Yes, and then it's going to ask me to alt text this image, so I'm just going to type in Book Now and click OK. Okay, so there's our image on the page. But right off the bat, something about this seems a little different than what we saw before. We now see these little green arrows in the upper left-hand corner. Anytime that you see that in an image, this tells you that this is a Photoshop Smart Object. The other clue that something's a little different about this particular image is found in the Properties Inspector. In the Properties Inspector, we now have a value right here for original, and that's letting us know which Photoshop file this JPEG came from and explains the link between the JPEG and the Photoshop file. And we're going to take advantage of that in just a moment as we show the editing process of this. But those are two clues for you that this is indeed a smart object and not just a regular image. Now, Dreamweaver remembers that that JPEG was created from a Photoshop file. And anytime you place it on another page, it's going to link it to that source file. Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to go ahead and save the file we've got now. And what I want to do is I want to go into my Files panel and find mission.htm. I'm going to open up my mission page. I want to scroll down to the very bottom of that. I give myself a blank paragraph down there for my banner ad to show up at, and I'm going to insert the same image. Now, you can use any technique that you like to do this. I'm just going to go over to my Files panel, open up my Images directory, and find that banner.jpg. I'm just going to go ahead and drag and drop that right into that location on the page, and once again, I'm going to alt text that as Book Now. Now, when that comes in, notice that it still has the Smart Object indicator. So Dreamweaver tracks that image, and it knows that when you place it on the page, that more than likely you want to link back to that original Photoshop file to take advantage of the round-trip editing that this integration gives us. So we're now using a Photoshop Smart Object on multiple pages in our site. Not only does this workflow make it easier to create the web graphics, as this workflow goes ahead and optimizes and exports the graphics during the insertion process, but it also makes our banner ad easier to update. Now we're going to tackle the update process in our next movie. The most powerful feature of Photoshop Smart Object integration is the ease and efficiency with which you can make full site image updates. As you will see, if you edit the original image in Photoshop, Dreamweaver will indicate that the current image does not contain the most recent version. In addition to keeping tabs on the status of your smart objects, Dreamweaver also gives you the opportunity to edit your smart object in Photoshop, resave the web version of it, and update it in Dreamweaver all in one round-trip workflow. We'll explore the round-trip functionality first, and then discover how Dreamweaver monitors Photoshop smart objects once they've been updated. So here I have the gallery.htm, and I'm going to scroll down to find my banner graphic. There it is on the page, and notice that it's still synced to the original Photoshop file. Now, I want to give you guys, doing the exercise files at home, a little heads up here. If you open up this file and you see a little green and yellow arrow here, or a red and yellow arrow here, that means that it's not in sync anymore. Dreamweaver and Photoshop have a very tight integration, and if that file is moved at all, sometimes just copying it over to your hard drive can do it. Dreamweaver wants to update the most recent version of it, and sometimes that can be a little tricky. Now, we're going to show you guys how to update it and get the most recent version of it in just a little bit, but occasionally a bug surfaces. They do happen, and if that bug surfaces and it just does not allow you to update that image, then just go ahead and replace it to get a fresh one in there. You won't be experiencing this within your site. The only reason that you might experience it within this particular exercise file is because of the fact that exercise files are copied and moved in so many different places throughout the process that may throw Dreamweaver a little bit. But if that does happen to you, just go ahead and get rid of this one, place the Photoshop file again just like you did in the last movie, and you should be able to pick right back up that point in the lesson. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and select this banner graphic. And again, it's current. The image is doing fine. There's no problems there. But what I need to do now is make a change. Maybe the seasons are changing. It was winter when this banner graphic was first placed on the page, but we've got summer coming up now, so maybe we need to change it to reflect that. So to do that, I'm going to explore the round-trip editing features that Photoshop and Dreamweaver offers us. So with that selected, I'm going to go right down to my Properties Inspector, and I'm going to click the Edit in Photoshop icon right there. That's going to switch me over to Photoshop. Notice that it opened up the source Photoshop file and not the flattened JPEG. So if I go over here in Photoshop and look at my Layers panel, and I'm just going to close the Brush Presets panel here, I can see that I've got a fully layered Photoshop file now. So it took me back to the original PSD document, not the JPEG. Well, this is going to be a very easy change for us to make because I'm just going to turn off the visibility of the winter layer folder group and turn on the visibility of the summer layer folder group. Perfect. So it's a quick and easy update to our banner graphic, but really at this point, you could make any change that you want here. You could add layers, you could add text, you could add effects, you could brighten things. I mean, it's whatever change you want to make. All right, so now I'm going to go up and save this file. And as soon as that's saved, I can close it and I can move back into Dreamweaver. Now, when I move back into Dreamweaver, Dreamweaver has a little bit of a message for me. You'll notice that my arrow is no longer green and green. It's now green and red. What this is saying is, hey, this original asset has been modified since the last time you were in Dreamweaver. Oh, yeah, we know because we just did that, right? So Dreamweaver is basically saying, look, do you want the modified version of this? Do you want me to go ahead and update it? And yeah, we do want that. So there are two ways to do this. With the image selected, we could go down to the Properties Inspector, and you can see right here we have a little graphic that says Update from Original. So clicking on that would go out, find the most recent version of it from Photoshop, and overwrite our banner JPEG. Now, the second way to do this is to simply right-click. We could right-click our graphic, and we could choose Update from Original. And as soon as we do that, it's going to go out, get the most recent version of that, and it's going to overwrite our banner.jpg. Now, that's really cool because in Photoshop, we didn't have to do Save for Web and Devices. We didn't have to browse out and find this banner JPEG. We didn't have to override it. All we needed to do was come right back into Dreamweaver and say, yes, give me the most recent modified version of that Photoshop. That also means that you're not required to go get the most recent version of it. If you've modified that banner, but it's going to be, say, a month or two away before you have to use it live on your site, then you just wait till that point to modify it. Now, the really good news is This is going to update it in your site no matter how many times it's used within your site. For example, go ahead and open up the mission.htm as well. If I scroll down there, I see that the change has automatically been made there and the graphic is synced up as well. So Photoshop and Dreamweaver are going to go ahead and sync this site-wide, and wherever you've used this smart object, you're going to get the most recent version of that graphic as soon as you update one of them. So from a strictly time-saving standpoint, the Dreamweaver Photoshop Smart Object integration makes for an extremely compelling workflow. When you add in the functionality of being able to create the graphics upon insertion, for many users, this workflow will quickly become the standard workflow. Now, one size doesn't fit all, of course, and you need to consider carefully whether you want to adopt this workflow for some or all of the images in your site. As we will see, this isn't the only integration that Photoshop and Dreamweaver shares, and it ignores working with Fireworks, which is another powerful web graphics creation tool, entirely. In the end, it's simply one of many options that you have available when editing the images on your site. That choice is a good thing, and this is a great choice to have. Prior to CS4, copying and pasting from Photoshop into Dreamweaver was the only integrated workflow available between the two products. Now, that might not seem too efficient, and in many ways it isn't, but depending upon your needs, this might be the perfect workflow for you, or it might be the one that you can turn to in certain situations. Now, put simply, you can copy artwork in Photoshop and paste it into Dreamweaver as a web graphic. Like the Smart Object workflow, optimization is done as the file is inserted on the page, and a link is created to the source file. Unlike Smart Objects, there is no indicator that tracks the source file, or any way to automatically update once the source graphic has changed. That doesn't mean you can't update the graphic, as we're going to see in this exercise. So I have the mission.htm file open, and if I scroll down a little bit, I can see that I need a mission accent graphic right there. Now, this is an image placeholder, and if you've never dealt with image placeholders before, I think you're going to find them pretty useful. You can find them by going up to the Common Objects, Image Grouping, and there's Image Placeholder right there. If you're making a mock-up or maybe working with a team and you need to hand a few pages off to folks, image placeholders essentially allow you to choose a size and a color, and then you can name it, you can alt text it, you can do all sorts of really cool stuff to this, and your fellow designers or you at a later date will know exactly where the images need to go on your page. So they're a pretty neat little feature. So what we're wanting to do is go out to a mock-up that we've done in Photoshop of the original page and determine which accent photo that we really want to use on this page. So I'm going to go over to my Files panel. I'm going to open up the Assets folder, and inside that I can find mockup secondary.psd. I'm just going to double-click the icon for that. That's going to launch Photoshop and open the mockup in Photoshop. Okay, so here we're seeing a full-page mockup of this page as we were designing it, and I'm going to zoom up on this and kind of move up so that I can see these accent photos. And when the designer was doing this, they were deciding between either the California street image, the image of this person on the beach, or another image of that person on the beach. So we've got 3 images there that we just couldn't make a decision for, so they left them all in there. So now maybe we want to see what they would look like inserted into the finished page. So what we're going to do is we're going to select just that portion of the image, copy it, and paste it onto the page. So to do that, I'm going to go find this Photo 3 layer over in my Layers panel. I'm going to hold down the Control key, that'd be the Command key on the Mac, and I'm going to click the Layer Thumbnail. That's going to make a selection around just that photo, and it's a lot easier and certainly more precise than trying to do that by hand. Now, in order for this to work properly, I'm going to go up to the menu, and I'm going to go to Edit and choose Copy Merged. Now, the reason that I want to do Copy Merged there is that Copy Merged is going to give me everything from every single layer that's inside the selection. So in this case, it's maybe not as important because we are only copying off of a single layer, but for a layered Photoshop file, you might have a text layer, you might have some layer effects going on, maybe you have an adjustment layer, and you'd want all of those to be combined into your copied selection. So just as a general rule, remember to use Copy Merged for this particular workflow. So I'm going to choose Copy Merged, and now all I need to do is switch back into Dreamweaver. Now back into Dreamweaver, I want my new image exactly where this accent image is. It'd be tempting to just keep that selected and paste it in, but if you do that, you might pick up a few unwanted attributes from this particular image. So what I'm going to do is delete the image And then very carefully, I'm not going to move my cursor. You can see your cursor is blinking right there in front of the O. That's where I want it. Now I'm going to go up to Edit and choose Paste. Now at this point, Dreamweaver says, okay, you want to place this image on the page. That's fine. What we need to do now is go ahead and optimize it. So we're seeing our image optimization dialog box here. We can choose from any graphic format that we want. We want JPEG. And I'm just going to leave the quality at 80 as a default. Now, if I click over in the File section of this, I want to point something out about this particular workflow. We are free to resize this image. We could scale it up, we could scale it down, really whatever we needed to do here. But there is one thing that you need to understand. Later on, if we choose to update this image by going back to Photoshop and copying and pasting again, any sizing information that we do here at this stage will not be retained. So you're going to have to write it down or remember it, so that the next time you do this, you get exactly the same size image. So I'm just going to go ahead and click OK. And then next we're going to be prompted to save the file. Now browse to the 0808 images directory. And notice that it picks up the same name as your Photoshop file. Now sometimes that might be acceptable, but for this one it's kind of not. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in mission_accent.jpg. So that's the name I want for this one, mission_accent. I'm going to save that into the images directory. Now we're tasked to alt text this image, so I'm just going to call this one California Street, and it places the image on the page. Now we need to go ahead and make sure the image is aligned to the right-hand side, so I'm going to select the graphic, and using the class pull-down menu, I'm going to choose article image from the class, and that's going to align it and position it where we want that image to be. Okay, well that looks pretty good. Not a bad little workflow. Notice that if you select the image, it does remember that the mock-up secondary image is the source graphic for that. But this is not a smart object, so if I go back and make a change to the Photoshop file and come back into Dreamweaver, Dreamweaver isn't going to automatically say to me, oh, should I update that graphic? It's going to have no knowledge of that whatsoever. So what if you do make a change? Or in the case of this mock-up that we've got, what if we decided we wanted to use one of the other images? Well, the workflow is still there. It's just a little bit more manually labor intensive. Let me show you what I mean. Let's say we click the edit button here now. Because of the fact that our mockup was listed as the original source file, it is going to open that back up into Photoshop. Now, we still had it open, so it just switched right back into Photoshop. But if you had closed this file, it would reopen it. I'm going to turn off the visibility of the Photo 3 layer and have the Photo 2 layer visible. And again, if for whatever reason your selection wasn't loaded, remember you can just hold down the Control or the Command key and click the thumbnail for the layer that you want to select, in this case Photo 2. And once again, I can go right back up and say Copy, Merge. So Edit, Copy, Merged, and then switch back to Dreamweaver. Now here in Dreamweaver, this gets a little easier. I can simply select the image that I already have on the page and go up to Edit and choose Paste. You'll notice we didn't have to go through the optimization settings again. You'll notice that we did not have to save the graphic again. It's still saved it as Mission Accent. Now that is a big point. It did overwrite that previous graphic. So if you wanted to create a separate version of this, you would need to copy and paste it again. Also, it retained the alt text. So now I'm just going to type in looking out at the ocean as my alt text. So be sure to check out those minor details. Also, any resizing information that you used previously, you're going to have to re-enter that as this is brought in. So it's a nice workflow. It's maybe not quite as thorough as Smart Objects, but it might suit your task because although some of the information like resizing isn't retained, it's going to work great if you're using things like mock-ups or wireframes or images that you don't want to slice or split up into multiple images. Now, this process also allows for a lot of creative exploration, since updating the images is simply a process of copying and pasting, so that part of it is really, really fast. Now, regardless of exactly which workflow you use, the integration between Photoshop and Dreamweaver gives you powerful options when working with images in your sites, and it's just going to give you a lot more creative flexibility overall. One of the constant challenges in working with sites built around clean HTML and CSS is precisely what to control with CSS and what to control through the HTML. Working with images is a particularly gray area, since there are many properties that you can control either through CSS or directly through the image itself. In this movie, we're going to discuss the image properties you can change using Dreamweaver's Properties Inspector and the benefits of controlling these properties through the image tag or through CSS. So here we have the explorers.html file opened up, And I want to scroll down just a little bit to examine this image on our page. So I'm going to select the image of the couple at the bistro, and I'm going to turn our attention down here to the properties inspector. So there is a lot of stuff going on here, and if you're looking at this stuff for the first time, it can almost be a little overwhelming. Like, what is all this stuff, and what can I do with it, and what should I be doing with it? Well, let's just go through it one piece at a time. Now, first off, in the upper left-hand corner, we have an ID. You could set an ID which would also assign both an ID and a name attribute to this image. Now, why would that be valuable? Well, ID and name can be very valuable because they could be tied into the CSS you're currently doing. So doing that can help you style your image. You might be also hooking into different type of JavaScript functions that you've written for this page. So perhaps that would trigger a CSS-based rollover if you have the JavaScript written for that, or integrate it into part of a JavaScript app, because for JavaScript to control an object on the page, the object has to have a name or an ID attribute, and that's one of the things that we would be able to do through the use of that. Now, just beside that, you'll notice that we have a width and a height. Now, to be honest, you really should never change this. You basically want to make sure that when you save the image out, it's the width and the height that you need it to be. But Dreamweaver does give us those options. In fact, Dreamweaver gives us these handles, and we can grab those, and we can make that image as wide and as tall as we want it to be. I don't think we help the image out there. There's an old saying, just because you can doesn't mean you should, and that certainly is applicable here. But look what Dreamweaver did for me, though. It says, hey, you've changed this and you've changed this. How do I know that? Because the text is bold. So if you see a measurement there that doesn't look quite right, that's a clue to you that maybe one of your other teammates or somebody, or maybe even you, the night before when you were working really late, changed that without meaning to. Well, Dreamweaver gives us another nice little tool as well. We have a little refresh button there, and if I click that, it's going to reset that image to its proper size, sort of undoing that damage that I just did. So you want to be kind of careful about that. We also have, right beside that, a source property. Now, I want to point out exactly what the source property does for you by switching to a split view so that we can see both the image tag and the image at the same time. Images are controlled through the use of this image tag, IMG. And this attribute in the Properties Inspector, source, is the source attribute right here in our tag. The source attribute is telling the browser or user agent where to go find that image. So in this case, it's saying go look in the images directory and find lunch.jpg. So changing this through the use of the point to file icon or typing something in or placing an image on the page is going to actually set that attribute within the code. We also have a link attribute, so if you wanted to make this image a clickable link that people could click on to go to another page, you would enter that information there. And we have a target right below that. The target property is linked to the link property. If you wanted to, say, open up the page that you were linking to in a new browser window or a new tab, you could use the target pull-down menu to do that. We also have our alt text. We've talked about that in some previous movies, but if you want to manually set that alt text, you could highlight that there and choose that. And we also have some editing options here. Now, we've covered these in some of our previous movies, but very briefly, if you want to edit this image, you can simply click on this icon to edit it in the program of your choice, in this case, Photoshop. But we also have an Edit Image Settings icon that we haven't really talked about yet. If you ever need to re-optimize an image, maybe something was saved at too high of a compression, or maybe an image was saved and it's just a little too large, you can click that, and you're going to get your image optimization dialog box that comes back up, and you get to choose which settings you'd like this image to have. You need to be very cautious about using this, especially if you're working with JPEGs. Remember, JPEGs are optimized every single time they're saved, so you're going to be throwing image data away. So you're not going to be improving the image quality of something by doing this. You're in most cases going to be degrading the image quality. So typically this is only done if you really need to save file size. My advice is to go ahead and make sure you export the graphic out of Photoshop or whatever program you're working in the size you need it originally. That way you'll avoid having to worry about that. Now, turning our attention to the bottom row, right here we see controls for making an image map. Image maps are not as widely used online as they were, say, 5, 6, 7, 10 years ago, but they are a viable way of creating areas within your image that can be linked. So, for example, if I wanted to highlight this glass of lemonade and make it link out to one page, and highlight her hat and maybe link out to a page about hats, I could certainly do that by using this image map and drawing hotspots around those link areas. We have a property called VSpace, which is vertical space, and HSpace, which is horizontal space. This image is currently just sort of floating right in our text, and it shows us something about images. They are inline level elements, and browsers and user agents just flow them right in with the rest of your copy. In this case, when your image is so much larger than your text, it gives you a very weird layout. So VSpace and HSpace are going to help you do things like move the text away from the image. For example, I could go into HSpace here and type in 10, and it would give me 10 pixels of space. It would push that text away from that. Now, if you were paying attention, you probably also noticed that it pushed the image away from the edge of the container as well. So HSpace goes horizontally on both the left and the right side. We got 10 pixels worth of space on both of those sides. Vertical space would give us space above and below. So we don't get to pick one side over the other. It just kind of happens to both sides. We have a little dialog box here for original, and if I have a Photoshop image that is the original source file for that, I can let Dreamweaver know about it within that dialog box, and then if I click to edit the image, it will instead open up the Photoshop file rather than the JPEG. That can save you a lot of time and effort from having to go hunt down and open up that Photoshop file yourself. The last couple of settings I want to show here. Border, we can enter in a border for a graphic. Let me show you what I mean. If you do that, you're going to get sort of that three-dimensional sort of grooved border that browsers put in, and honestly, it's going to be up to the browser. Chrome's got its own version of the border. Firefox has its own version of it. So you're not really controlling exactly what border type you want. You're not in control of that. That's why I would recommend, if you really want a border around your graphic, use CSS to do that. If you're going to make a link out of this graphic, it might be a good idea to come in and type in border 0. That way, you won't have any type of decoration or blue border around the image. Some browsers use that as a default. If an image has a link, it'll put a blue border around the image without you asking it to. We also have a couple of tools here that allow us to crop our images, allows us to sharpen our images, change the brightness and contrast. And these are kind of neat tools, but again, I'm of the mind that you should probably do this in a program that's designed to do it, such as Photoshop. But notice if I choose to increase the brightness and contrast of this image, I can go ahead and increase the contrast and make some fairly dramatic changes to my image. Maybe that's what I want to do. Maybe that's not what I want to do. But frankly, I don't think that this is the right place to do that. You should probably open that image back up in Photoshop or Fireworks, tweak it, do what you need to do to it, save it back out again, and come back into Dreamweaver. But for small changes or maybe changes where you don't have access to the software, it's not a bad tool to use. Now I'm going to go ahead and click OK here, but the thing I want you to remember is that I've just made a permanent change to that image. The moment I save this page and close it, I have literally changed that JPEG graphic. So if it's being used on any other page, I've changed it there as well. Finally, I want to talk about the alignment option down here. This confuses a lot of people because if you grab this pull-down menu, you can see we have a lot of options. We have baseline, top, middle. What is all this stuff? Well, typically this was created to deal with image captions, a single line of text. So if I choose middle, for example, notice that the line of text that it is part of aligns to the very middle of the graphic. However, the rest of the text doesn't wrap around it at all. But if you do want to have the text wrap around the image, you do have a couple of choices with this. If I go to the Align pull-down menu and I choose left, notice that the image aligns to the left of the text. If I choose right, the image aligns to the right of the text. Here, the horizontal space is helping us keep the text away from the image. So if I take that back down to 0, you can see the text is butting up right against the image. But of course, the downside to this, and I'll go back to using 10 here, is that it moves the image away from the edge of the container as well. So you get it on both sides. So that is one way to achieve that look. Now, what's wrong with doing that in HTML versus CSS? Nothing. It's a personal choice. However, it's not as flexible. By saying image align right, we are flowing our text exactly the way we want, but we have very little control over the spacing of this and how it's placed within the text. You can see we have our H and V space properties, but it's really pushing the image away from the edge of the container too, and that's really not what I want at all. So I'm going to remove my H space, and I'm going to take my alignment back to default, because there's another way to do this, and it would be modifying our images through CSS. If I select this graphic, I have one more option available to me here in the Properties Inspector. I have this little class pull-down menu. I'm going to grab that. I'm going to go up, and I'm going to choose Article Image. And sure enough, it lines over to the right just like I wanted it to. It gives me enough padding, 16 pixels worth, off of this so that the text isn't butting right up against the image. And it keeps it aligned to the right edge, which is exactly what I wanted to do. So in this case, Cascading style sheets were a better choice than modifying the image HTML properties themselves. So how do you style images through CSS? Well, we're going to cover that in our next exercise, but for now, I think you can see that there are a ton of properties you can change once an image has been placed on the page. Now, based on what the focus of your CSS is, you may want to control a lot of those properties through your styles rather than through the image itself. In the long run, that's going to create less work when modifying similar image properties across the entire site. Be extremely careful when resizing or editing the image from the Properties Inspector. Image quality may degrade, so you want to test that thoroughly before committing to any changes. Usually, placing the image on the page is just the beginning of making sure it fits within the design of your site. While there are certain properties that you can set manually on an image, for the most part, you'll want to customize the look and feel of your images through cascading style sheets. Using styles allows you to create different looks and behaviors based on where the image is found, the context in which it is being used, and what type of image it is. The other obvious advantage to using styles for image is the ease of updating them. Rather than having to find dozens or even hundreds of images and modifying them individually, you can update the specific style and have the change occur site-wide. So I have the gallery.html file open, and what we're going to do now, I'm going to scroll down a little bit, is write a style that's going to modify these images within the gallery. One of the things that we would like to do is maybe wrap the text around the images a little bit, keep the text off of it so they're not butting right up against the images like they're doing now, and maybe stylize our images a little bit by having a custom border around them to really sort of set them off from the rest of the images within the site. Now, those are all things that we can do with CSS, and it's not really going to take us a long time to write the style. It's a very quick, very easy style to write. So what I'm going to do is go over to my CSS Styles panel. So I'm going to open that up, and I want to scroll down, and there's a whole section here where we just have individual classes. You can see float right, float left, call out. I'm going to select the very last one of those, which is quote, and I'm going to click right here to create a brand new CSS rule. Now I want to do a class selector, and I'm just going to name this class .gallery image. So very descriptive name. Remember, because this is a class selector, it has to have that period on the front end of it, and you don't want any spaces in there at all. So just .gallery image. I'm going to define that in our external style sheet, main.css, and I'm just going to go ahead and click OK. Well, let's take each of those requirements one at a time. One of the first things I want to do is ensure that the text wraps around this image. So I'm going to go to my box category, and I'm going to use the float property to do that. So whereas you can use the image align attribute to do that through your HTML, through CSS, we're going to achieve the same results through a property called float. Now, we're going to talk more about floats in the chapter on layout. So if you're interested in learning more about floats, there's going to be a good bit of more information there. So I'm going to grab the float pull-down menu, and I'm going to float them to the left. That will wrap the text around the right-hand side and float the image to the left. I'm also going to do a clear left property. Now, why in the world am I going to do that? Well, it's basically going to keep these in a single row. If you float one object to the left, and then another object below it is also floated to the left, the object below it tends to just come up and occupy the same line, and they sort of line up horizontally right beside each other. So by clearing this, we're basically saying, okay, I want to float to the left, but don't let anybody float to my left. So that's what clear does for us, and that's why we're doing it here, so that each of these guys will be on their own separate line. Now, we need to go ahead and make sure that the text isn't going to butt right up against this image, and we want to affect the spacing from one image to the other so that they're spaced an equal distance apart from each other. We're going to use padding and margins to do that. So for padding, I'm just going to go ahead and keep same for all, and I'm just going to do 5 pixels worth of padding all the way around my image. Now, what that's going to do for us is it's actually just going to give me a little bit of space between the image and the border that I'm going to be creating. So this is more to create a decorative frame around the image than it is to control any type of spacing. For that, I'm going to use margins. So I'm going to deselect same for all for margins, and I'm going to give it a right margin of 1em, right margin of 1em. Since this image is floated to the left and the text will be wrapping around the right-hand side, that 1em is going to push the text away from the image by 1em, which in most cases will work out to about 16 pixels. Okay, so we're all looking pretty good. This has been fairly easy so far. The next thing that we're going to do is do a border. So I'm going to click on the border category, and I'm just going to go ahead and do a solid border all the way around my file. Now, I'll tell you what, let's do something a little different here. Let's turn off same for all of these guys. We're going to do a border all the way around it, but we're going to modify that border to give the slightest indication of maybe even a little shadow, okay? So for the top border, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a solid border, 1 pixel, and for color, I'm going to choose pound CCC. That's sort of a light gray. Now for the right border, what I'm going to do here is a solid border, 1 pixel as well. This time I'm going to change the color to pound 999. That's a darker gray. So the top will have a light gray. The right border is going to be a darker gray. I'm going to use the same border for the bottom. So solid, 1 pixel, and that pound 999, sort of a darker gray. And then for the left side, I'm going to do solid, 1 pixel, and I'm going to do the CCC. So I've got top and left are going to be the lighter gray, right and bottom are going to be the darker gray. They're very similar grays. It's going to be a really subtle difference. I think this is one of those things where if you tried to overdo it and do like a black line there or even a darker gray, it might look a little cheesy. So as that is, that's just going to be a really nice little subtle effect. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK, and we're going to test our rule out. I'm going to select the first graphic in our gallery, which is the Golden Gate Bridge. And for the class, I'm going to grab the pull-down menu, and I want to find Gallery Image right there. As soon as I select that, notice that we get a nice little frame around it. That's what the padding and the border is giving us. We have a slightly darker line here than on the top and the left, so it gives us a little bit of an illusion of a drop shadow without really giving us one. And the text wraps around it exactly the way that we wanted it to. Cool. That looks perfect. Now all we have to do is go and apply that to each and every one of the images within the gallery. So there's a little bit of manual application here, but not a whole lot. And the real strength and value of this is that if we ever needed to change this, let's say we decided to do a thicker border, or maybe we didn't like the amount of spacing we were giving between our images, we could certainly just go back, modify that one class, and all of the images throughout our site that might be using this would update it. So that's really cool. Now, also, I want to point out that this is by no means the limit of what you can do with images in CSS. Part of the fun of learning and using CSS is the creative exploration that that's going to lead to. So I want to encourage you to experiment with your images, combining borders, background colors, padding, margins, all sorts of different stuff for any type of creative effect that you're looking for. The important thing to remember is that you can use CSS to control the visual presentation of images as well, making sure that they conform to the overall design strategy of your site. An alternate way for you to display images on your pages is through the use of CSS background images. Every single element on your page has the ability to display a background color or image, or both if you prefer. Now, this allows you to display images on the page without using an image tag and creates the opportunity for presentation-only images. Now, this allows you to use images for your design without cluttering up your HTML with unnecessary image tags. In this example, we will apply a background image to the body tag to give our page a little bit more visual kick, add the Explore California logo, and give our list some custom bullets. And if we're looking at this page, and I have the resources.html page open, it lacks some of the visual kick that maybe our other pages have had. Now, not all of the background graphics have been removed from the page, but most of them have. So our image, a logo that we're used to seeing here, the gradient in the background is not here anymore. We're missing our link, so we're missing a few things here. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go into our CSS, explore the background image property, and set some of the background images for a few of these elements. Now, the first one we want to do is our body tag. The body tag is the topmost parent element, and a very common technique among web designers is to use background images to sort of create an interesting visual background for the entire page. And that's really what we're going to be doing here. So I want to go over to my CSS styles panel, and I want to find the body tag right there. Just go ahead and double click that. That's going to open up the CSS rule definition dialog box, and I want to switch from our categories from type to the background category. So here we can see where we can establish a background color, or in the case of what we need to do, browse to find a background image. So I'm going to go ahead and click browse, and we want to browse to the 08_11 images directory. Now here I'm going to switch my view to detail so I can quickly jump down to what I need to find here. And I'm going to scroll down into my graphics until I find this one right here, page_background.jpg. Now, if you select that and look over to the right-hand side, you'll see something pretty interesting about this graphic. It's very narrow. It's only 10 pixels wide, but it's 1,600 pixels tall. So that's kind of curious. How is that one graphic going to give us a background for our entire page? Well, let's check this out. Go ahead and click OK. And notice that we have some other options down here for customizing what happens with those background graphics. For example, one of the options is background repeat. Now, by default, background images just tile over and over and over and over again. Right on top of each other, they go from left to right, top to bottom. And that's been responsible for some really bad page designs in the past. But you can also use that to your advantage, because notice I can grab the pull-down menu. I can tell this graphic, hey, you shouldn't repeat. You should only show up one time. Go ahead and repeat. That's what I want you to do. Or repeat only along one axis. So I could have it repeat along the x-axis, which would just repeat it horizontally. Or I could repeat it along the y-axis, which would repeat it vertically. Now remember from looking at that thumbnail that this is a very thin image, but very long. So if we repeat this along its x-axis, it's just going to show up over and over and over again. And since it's going to seamlessly blend together, it's going to give the illusion, and I'm just going to go ahead and click OK, of a single gradient in the background, when in fact, all that is just that graphic repeating over and over again. Now, you may have noticed something else about this too. After a certain amount of scrolling, that graphic kind of goes away, and I'm left with sort of a white background color. Well, that's another thing that we can do for this body tag. So I'm going to double-click that. So reopen that selector, go back to background, and in addition to having a background image, you can also have a background color. So I'm going to click right there for background color, and I'm going to type in pound E1 D8 B9. If you hit tab, you'll see that it's kind of that sand color. And now when I click OK, this time when I scroll down, instead of seeing the bottom of that graphic, because the bottom of the graphic and that sand color are the same, it's a nice seamless merging between the background image and the background color. So those two things can be used in conjunction with each other to form some pretty compelling effects. Well, we need to get our logo on the page, and our logo is going to go right here in this header region. So what I want to do now is go over to my CSS Styles panel, scroll down and find the header region. There it is. Double-click that and go to my background property. Once again, I need to browse to find an image. And in this case, I want to find the logo graphic. So I'm going to scroll down until I find logo.gif. You can see the image preview right here. Perfect. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Now, in this particular instance, I don't want that to repeat at all. I don't want to ever see more than just one of these graphics. So what I'm going to do now is for my background repeat, I'm going to tell it no repeat. Now, I also want to point out something else that's very important about this. So if you want to see the entire image, you need to set both a width and a height for that as well. Now, that has already been done on this rule, and I'll show you that in just a moment. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Notice that we're just seeing one copy of the logo showing up in that space. Just to show you that whole width and height property that I was talking about, I'm going to bring up my code navigator, and I want you to notice that right up here for this particular header selector, I have a width of 192 and I have a height of 237. Not by coincidence, that is the exact same size as my image. So that's why we're seeing the entire graphic, and it fits in there very, very nicely. Now, I'm going to scroll down a little bit further, and I want to show you this list we've got down here. So this is a bulleted or unordered list, but you may notice that we're not seeing any bullets. The reason for that is in one of the other selectors, we're setting the list style property of our UL to none. That tells any browser or user agent don't display numbers or bullets depending upon what type of list this is. This is a really easy way for you to do custom bullets for your lists. You can tell the list not to display as a list, and then you can use a background graphic for the individual list items and use that as a bullet. So that's what we're going to do here. So what I want to do is go over to CSS Styles, scroll down a little bit, and I want to find the main content, main article, LI. Go ahead and double-click that, and once again, go to your background property. Here I'm going to browse for our background image. I'll go into our images directory again, and what I'm looking for here is the star_bullet.gif. Now you'll notice this is a very small graphic, 16 by 16 pixels, and it's very, very subtle. It's just that little star. Anytime that you're going to do custom bullets, my advice to you is to keep them small and to keep them simple. Most of the times when I see them and they weren't executed properly, the bullets themselves were either too large or somebody tried to put too complex of a graphic there. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. We have some very important choices to make here. Number one, we don't want to see those stars repeating all the way through our list item. We only want to see it on the left-hand side. So I'm just going to tell background repeat, no repeat. That is only going to show one star, and then click OK. There's our stars. Now, the reason that the stars aren't showing up underneath the text, you might be wondering about that, and I want to go ahead and point out the reason for that. The reason for that is there are 24 pixels worth of padding on the left-hand side that's keeping the text away from the edge of the element. So if I turn on my CSS Inspect feature, which we'll learn a little bit more about later on, when I browse over these, you can see that sort of purple magenta area right there. That's the padding giving enough space between the edge of the list item and the text so that the graphic can display. If that padding was not there, the H and the A and the D, all those first letters would be showing up right on top of that star. Okay, so in just 3 short additions to our CSS, we've made a dramatic impact, all without modifying the original HTML of our file at all or using any image tags. Background images can add a lot to your site's visual design without adding additional weight to your HTML code. Now, often I'm asked a question of when you should use a background image versus adding an image tag to the page. Well, my answer to that is that for me, if the image needs to be encountered by other user agents or alt text needs to be passed on for that image, well, I'll go ahead and use an image tag. Otherwise, almost all of the other images on my pages are displayed using CSS background images. For every rule, there's an exception, and I tried to define clear-cut rules for background images at the start of building my sites. Now, we're almost done with our background images, but in our next movie, I want to explore using the positioning attribute of background images to further enhance the design. We saw in our previous movie how effective background images can be in enhancing your visual design. In this movie, we'll explore how you can exert more control over your background images through positioning the images within their container element. This allows us to create images that change based on user interaction and add accents to items such as block quotes and lists. In this example, we'll create CSS-based rollovers for our navigation and tweak our custom bullets so that they integrate with our list a little better. So I've got the resources file open from the 08012 folder, and something we really didn't address in the previous movie is no navigation. Where is that at? Well, it's all there, but we just don't have any images filling that space. So what's happened is the link that's being used for that is hiding the text. It is increased in size to allow for a background image to show up. So all that's left for us to do is to choose the proper background image. Now, the easiest way for us to do this is to use the CSS Styles panel. So what I'd like to do, I'm going to just lengthen that a little bit, collapse the Files panel by double-clicking that, and then scrolling through my properties here. So what I'm looking for is this set of links right here, base nav. And I'm looking for the base navs that apply to individual links, tours, mission, contact, resources, explorers. That's what I'm looking for. So you want to scroll through your list until you find UL, base nav, li, a.tours. And we'll just go through these in order one at a time. All right, the first thing I'm going to do is find the tours version and just double-click that. That's going to open it up in our CSS rule definition dialog box. I'm going to go to background, and right over here, I'm going to browse for my background image. Now, I'm going to browse to the 0812 folder and go inside the images directory. And I'm going to switch this to a detailed view. And what I need now is the tours graphic. You may need to resize this so that you can make sure you're reading these properly. What I'm looking for is tours_main.gif. Now, if you look to the right to the thumbnail of this, you're going to see a very important clue as to what we're going to be doing here. You'll notice that even though it's one long graphic, 817 pixels by 60 pixels, it actually looks like 3 of them. That's because there are 3 different states for our menu in a single graphic. We're going to use the positioning attribute of the background image to change that based on how users are interacting with it or the current page that we're on. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And I'm going to choose no repeat because I only want to see one of these. And now we're going to take a look at background positioning. Now, background positioning can be either assigned to an X or a Y coordinate, and you could also think of those as horizontal or vertical. We do have some keywords that we can use. So if you grab the pull-down menu, you could choose left and top. That would align the top left-hand corner of the background image with the top left-hand corner of its parent element. I'm going to go ahead and click OK, and I can see right there our background image tours is now showing up and lining up exactly where I want it to. All right, we need to go ahead and do that for the rest of those. So I'm going to go to Mission, double-click that, go to our background category, and browse for the image. Now for this one, we're looking for the mission _ main.gif. I'm going to click OK. We're going to do no repeat for the background image, and once again left and top for the background position. Click OK, and now mission shows up. Next up is contact. So I'm going to double-click that in the CSS Styles panel. I'm going to go to the background category, and then I want to browse for this graphic. Now here we're looking for contact _ main. Go ahead and click OK, and just like the last two, no repeat, left, and top. Now we need to do resources. Again, I'm going to go to my background category, browse for this, and in the images directory this time, we're looking for resource main.gif. Click OK. No repeat because we only want to see it once. Left and top. Click OK. And finally, our last one down here is going to be Explorers. So go find Explorers. Go to the background category, and here you're going to browse to Explorers _ main. Background repeat is going to be no repeat, left, and top. Okay, cool. So there is our menu, and it looks fine, and it would work just fine, but we want to tweak this a little bit. You may have noticed, again, that this graphic was actually 3 graphics in one. Our sidebar over here is 272 pixels wide. And I'm just going to show you this open in Photoshop really quickly. And if I open up one of these in Photoshop, I think you can see this a little bit more clearly. So what we've got is for every 272 pixels, there's a new version of this. Now that means that if we change the position of this background graphic based on somebody, say, hovering over it, then we can simply switch it from this one to this one by moving the graphic over to the left or over to the right or whichever direction we need to do. So let's go take a look at doing that within our CSS. So now back in Dreamweaver, all we need to do is update 2 of our CSS rules. I want to point out these 2 in particular. We have ul baseNav lia.current, and then the same thing with the hover attribute applied to it too, grouped together. That is going to deal with any page that's been identified as the current page. We also have this one, ul baseNav lia hover. What that rule is going to do is it's going to affect any of those list items as they're being hovered over, as say somebody was rolling over the links. And that's the one that we are going to start with. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight that one. Now, you might be tempted to go ahead and double-click this and bring it up and go to the background category. I'm going to caution you not to do that, okay? The reason I'm going to say that is because we don't need to modify the background property. We need to use the very specific background position property. If you double-click that, go into the background category and start making some changes, you can overwrite the changes that we've already done. We don't want that, okay? So here's what I'd want you to do. Go right down here into this properties section, add a property, and you want to add the background dash position property. Now, again, you can grab that from the pull-down menu and choose background position if you don't feel like typing that in. Now, when you're doing a background position property, you can put 2 values into that. The first value will be the horizontal value, left, center, right. The second value is going to be the vertical value, top, center, bottom. Now, you don't have to use those keywords that I just called out. You can actually use numeric values. So we know that that graphic is 272 pixels wide for each one of its different states. So in order to move it over to the left, all I have to do is type in negative 272 pixels. And then I can hit space and type in a 0 because I don't want to move it up or down at all. So I can just say negative 272 and 0 and hit return. Now that's going to work for every single one of these guys because they all are going to do the same thing. They're just going to shift over by negative 272 pixels. Let's do something very similar to the rule just above that. So this ul baseNav lia.current and then ul baseNav lia.current hover. It takes me a long time to say that. And looking at it, if you're brand new to CSS, you've got to just be going, are you kidding me? But really, it's really simple, guys. All this is saying is, hey, if there's an A tag, which is your link, inside of a list item, which our main navigation is built out of a list, if that's inside of an unordered list with the ID of base nav, which this is, then I want to do something. That's all that's saying. So there's really nothing complicated about it. It's just targeting something based on its structure. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and add the same property to this. We're going to do background dash position. Again, if you don't feel like typing it, you can just grab that from the pull-down menu. And now what I need to do is set some values there. Now, I would be tempted to go ahead and multiply 272 by 3, but I'm pretty bad at math, and I've got some keywords that can help me here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do right space top. So we're back to using keywords. Now, what is that going to do for us? Well, that's going to take the top right-hand corner of the image and line that up with the top right-hand corner of the element. So that's all we really needed. And hey, look, resources has already changed. If you were to place your cursor inside of resources, you would see it says a.resources current. So the class current has already been applied to this link, and we're seeing that work. Cool. Now we're going to see the hover in just a moment, but I want to make one quick tweak to our page before we do that. Background positioning can help you with a lot of things and not just links. Take a look at the custom bullets that we made. Do they look a little high up to you? Well, that's because the top of the graphic is lining up with the top of the image. It's not sort of centering there. So let's go ahead and modify that slightly. What I want you to do is, again, go back to your CSS Styles panel, scroll down until you find this selector right here, Main Content, Main Article, LI. Go ahead and select that. Here we have the background image that we added earlier. Now, we could certainly do this here, but there's no harm, no foul in double-clicking that and bringing up our CSS rule definition dialog box again here. Click on the background category. We can see our star bullet, no repeat, but we didn't do anything for background positioning either X or Y. So what I want to do here is 0 for X because I don't want it to move right or left. But for background position Y, I'm going to type in 2 pixels. What that's going to do is it's going to push the image down by 2 pixels, which, as we see when we click OK, sort of just moves it down a little bit and centers it a little bit better on those list items. Perfect. All right, let's do a save all. Preview this page in our browser. And one of the things that we're going to see when we roll over these links now is that you aren't swapping out image graphics when you do this. You're simply moving that graphic to the left by 272 pixels. But it gives you the nice illusion that you're swapping images out. Isn't that cool? By learning to control background image positioning, you can become much more creative with how your background images are integrated into your visual design. And you can add compelling techniques like this CSS-based image rollover that we did. There is, of course, more to using background images and their capabilities. I would invite you to check out any of the CSS-based titles on the lynda.com online training library, including my Dreamweaver CS3 and CS4 with CSS Essential Titles, where I have complete chapters on using background images.